Well, we welcome all to Merlowe's presentation on beekeeping in Maryland. And I will switch screens over and have Merlowe take it from here.
First, to let you know, I don't do public speaking ever. So I get very nervous in front of people watching me, and I'm in no way, shape, or form a master beekeeper. We do have master beekeepers in the Howard County Beekeeping Group. I have no desire to handle bees barehanded because I have a horrible reaction to stings. So I will never be a master beekeeper, but I had a very hard time putting this presentation together because I kept going down the rabbit hole and reading instead of actually putting the presentation together, because I find this fascinating. A big surprise for me. I started 7 years ago because I used to drive past the Howard County Fairgrounds and I would see the beekeeping class put up on the sign. We hold the classes in February's every year. There's usually 6 classes once a week. And I had been thinking about it for a couple years and I always forgot. I finally one year didn't forget. And I signed up, got the book, and ate it up. My nerd came back full force from school. And it grabbed me. I initially started wanting to do this because my son and I have horrible allergies, and they seem to get worse every year. The cure I had heard, was having a tablespoon of pollen every morning from local bees that collected what you're allergic to make their honey. And I had tried shots and that didn't work, so I raised bees. Was shocked to find out that most of the time when I sit outside and watch the hive, the girls are going up. Bees that you see on your flowers are very rarely honeybees. We have over 20,000 species of bees in the world. In Maryland, gosh, we have 7 species that are prevalent, but well over 150, including the wasp family. They did live 100,000 years ago with the dinosaurs. They found them in amber, so they know they were bees, but they were carnivorous, and they just ate other bugs and stung a lot, I'm sure. Scientists get a little goofy about that, wondering if the animals, brachiosaurs or whatever, got stung while they were eating. There are a lot of myths about honeybees, saying that there were none in North Carolina or in North America prior to the 1600s. There were, they just didn't produce honey from what the scientists have been able to find out anywhere here in North America prior to the Europeans bringing the honeybees over. But there were many different species, over 4,000 different species of bees prior to the 1600s. So Native Americans dealt with them, all the animals dealt with them. So just like the horses in Chincoteague, they used to live here before, then they died out for one reason or another. And then the Europeans brought them back. So horses and honeybees got them. When I was down in North Carolina, where my daughter lives, Chapel Hill is known as a bee keeping. It's almost their city bird, really. When you go out for a walk in the neighborhood, which is a neighborhood like very suburban, not like this, houses right next to each other. Their gardens are right up to the edge of the road, and their beehives are right there in the front yard, right next to the road, because they don't, of course, have the traffic that we do on Oak Park Road. I usually point mine away from the road because I don't want them to get hit by cars and they're flying around. Myth, there's another myth about honeybees. Honeybees being the only ones that produce honey, the ones that we know of. But they don't, because there are 20,000 species of bees, 7 of those do produce honey. The Mayans had, oh gosh, what was it? 500 native species of a type of bee that is stingless. And the Mayans would feast on that honey all the time. It was very easy for them to get if they could climb up the side of the cliff, because these bees built their hives up on the side of a cliff very, very high. But they didn't sting. So they had people in their different little cultures that would go out and collect them. I'm sure you've all heard of Africanized bees as one of the major species. It's thought that all bees came from the African continent and then spread out. The Africanized bees have a very bad reputation for being very aggressive, and they are. I used to buy packages of bees from someone every spring if I wanted to boost my population, my cattle, because the agricultural department calls it cattle. I would buy them from down in Georgia, and they would get them on the Georgia-Florida border, and I have had some incredibly aggressive bees in my yard, and that's one of the reasons I took a break this year. That and the surgeries I had, and I knew I couldn't wrangle the cattle. So I would be all the way across the yard, and these girls would just come over and sting me. It seemed like just for fun. Unfortunately, when the bees sting, they lose their stinger, and they do die because it pulls the venom sac out of their body. But that's on down the road. Forgetting about honeybees for a second. Another myth. You hear what's the popular thing? Bees are dying. They're an endangered species. Have any of you heard this sort of thing? Honeybees are very small population of the pollinators that we use, and if honeybees did go extinct, we would have plenty of pollinators because there are so many different varieties of bees. We wouldn't have any pollen, however, and that would be all because we use it in so many things, and it does have medicinal purposes. They're not as good at pollinating because they're not as furry, and I'll show you some slides of those. But the honeybees they're covered in fur, and so when they land on any flower, the pollen it's like Velcro. It just attaches to them. So the others that you see, like a yellow jacket, is considered in the bee species. It's technically a wasp in that family, but they're shiny and hard. They have very, very, very small hairs that you really can't see. I'm a total nerd. You should see. I will give you all. I wrote down the. This is from the Revolutionary War Journal. I like history a lot, and they talk about bees being brought over. And I have added links for all of the documents that I have up there that I'm talking about. That's in the slideshow. You can switch pages if you like. He's gonna switch pages. I'll keep talking.
Okay, hold on just a second.
There's another myth that I thought was interesting. Bumblebees are just like honeybees. We all know that bumblebees are the big fat cute ones. They are similar in a way. They are one of the only bees in our area that actually do create a hive and live social. All the others will live, either ground dwellers, wood dwellers, post dwellers. You'll see the little mason bee houses that you can buy. Those are excellent, especially if you have small children or don't want to fiddle with bees, and be a beekeeper per se and have all of the equipment. But you can buy one of those little houses and they do fill them up and they will pollinate your plants. They're actually very good at it. Honeybees are not very good at pollinating tomatoes and things that we would want them to. They don't do that. They don't like those tomatoes. They actually can't see that. As you'll see this, there is a real problem with pollinating per se, not necessarily honeybees, but bees in general, because of the lack. I would say the most serious problem is the lack of indigenous species of plants that they feed on. Very, very close second, or maybe even, is toxins in the environment, pesticides. Sorry, I'm looking at you now. What's important to help to keep pollinators prolific and to help you and to help get more honey too, if you're dealing with honeybees, is to try to plant native plants as much as humanly possible. I have added a link at the end of this also for several websites that will tell you which plants are native to Maryland specifically, so that we can do that. You'll see at Home Depot and Lowe's, if you go out, a lot of the less pretty things are the ones that are actually native to us, and they're not the big, showy, giant flowers. But they're the ones that actually feed the environment. Okay. I have some pretty pictures here. So when Bill gets back to the screen, he's over here fiddling with wires. But he gets back, he'll advance.
Okay, why doesn't this work? This is Google Drive. Anybody familiar with that? I don't seem to be getting more pictures.
Bill, you could click the button at the top that says slideshow, and that might start it. It might give you controls left and right.
Oh, there
You
we
try
go.
it and right row. Yeah.
Thank you.
I tried to add some pretty pictures. This is, I did get this off the internet, but it reminded me so much of the bee balm that Sandra gave to me. She pulls it out every spring and clumps and sends out a mass text saying, who wants some of this bee balm, because it takes over her garden. And that's the color that she gave me, and I love it. It just goes insane in my yard, and the bees love it. That was my hand that made it do that. Okay. Okay, so the life cycle of, let's get down to just honeybees for a second, just for a little bit. The life cycle of a bee. The queen bee goes into the honeycomb and lays an egg, as you'll see in the first section. The worker bees will feed it for a few days, and then when the larva reaches full growth, the worker will seal it with wax, and then the larvae stay in there and become a pupae. And when they're finally done, they will leave the nest and come out. Worker bees, first to give you just an overview, in the summertime when you see bees flying around and getting nectar, those girls work from the moment they come out of that cell for 6 weeks, and then they die of exhaustion. They are working and constantly from the time the sun comes up until the time the sun goes down, and sometimes afterwards, because I'll see them out there coming in the dark sometimes. If you look at the wings of a dead bee, like I'll go outside and look on the ground in front of the hive, and I'll see some of the older ones there. You'll notice that their wings are almost completely gone. They're completely tattered. It's kind of sad, makes me sad. After the bee is born, after 21 days, after the egg is laid and they're born after 21 days, they are weighing around 100 milligrams. And so they're little tiny little things, and I can tell when I open up a hive which are the little babies and which are the more adult ones. Right after birth, from days 0 through 3, they're drying off. The other worker bees will come and lick them and clean them off and get them ready to flex their little wings and all that good stuff. For the days 3 through 16, they are mortuary bees, some of them. So that means any dead bees that are in the hive, they will remove them and pick them up and fly them away from the hive. They don't just kick them out the door. They literally carry them away to keep disease down in the hive. So some of the ones 3 to 16 days old do that. Drone feeding is also a big role for days 4 through 12 for some of the others. Drones are the males. And when drones are babies, they're incapable of feeding themselves, so the girls have to feed them. When they're a little older, they do grow up, say 2 weeks old, the drones can eat on their own, but then all they do is just hang out in the honey and eat. They don't do any work, ever. It's always the girls that are doing the work. From days 7 to 12, there are other worker bees that are queen attendants, and their job is to take care of the queen by feeding her, grooming her, and to spread around the pheromones throughout the hive. It is that one queen, her pheromones, that keep that entire hive intact. So if that pheromone disappeared, if she disappeared, they would know instantly because the pheromone's not being spread, and they would start to create a new. From days 12 to 18, after they've done their nurse bee work, because we generally call 3 to 14 days when they're nurse bees, because they're taking care of other members of the society, they are packing pollen. You can move forward, I think. You might have a picture of pollen. Go after another one. I'll get you to go back to it. This is their eyes. Go back again. Or go forward again. Keep going. Oh, never mind. You can't find pollen. Go back to the other one. Anyway, they're packing pollen, and I've got some here I'm going to show you too. You can carry around and look at. When they're pulling pollen out of everything, they bring it in and they create, it's called brood bread. This is what they live off of in the colder months, and this is also what they feed the babies. From days 12 to 35, they're sealing honey. So once the honey is put in, they are packing it with their wax, which their body creates in the abdomen. On days 12 to 35, they're also building honey. So when you get a package of bees, or if you see bees, say in a barn side or in a house eaves or a swarm somewhere, only those bees that are from the days 12 to 35, those are the only ones that can create honeycomb. So you have to have tens of thousands of bees in one hive to create enough honeycomb to pack the pollen and the honey in. It is mind-boggling to me how much work is involved just to survive for them. They haven't figured out computers yet. Days 12 to 18, they are fanning. Some of them are fanning. So they are basically evaporating the water out of the honey and also cooling the hive. So there's a section of those bees that are just sitting around fanning. If you ever see them on a really hot, humid day outside of a hive, because I know there's so many beekeepers in the area, you can drive through the streets and see boxes. There's one right across the street at that little bitty greenhouse. They have nucleus hives stacked up. And you'll see sometimes on really, really hot, humid days, the bees on the outside of the box. That's called bearding, and they're just out there because it's too hot inside. And so they have to create more space, and they're outside also fanning to create air circulation around the box. And they do that for if they're in a tree or whatever. Then also during this time period, some of them are carrying water in because it takes an astronomical amount of water for them to create their honey. And days 18 to 21, you get the barred bees, and those are the ones that I don't like because they sting me regularly. If I'm over there fiddling with them and it's hot and they're cranky and they've got work to do and I get in their way, those guard bees will come out, and I can just stand there, look at them, and they'll march out like they own the place and buzz around me and get all in my face. Days 22 to 42, they're foraging. Those are the ones that are out there and that you're seeing in your squash flowers. I picked up a closed squash flower before and heard it buzzing and opened it up, and there was a bee sleeping inside of it that night. And when it woke up, it went back to the hive with all the pollen. So I guess it got hot. Out. So let's get to the slide. Let's go to the second one. Here is the little body, and I'm gonna nerd out. If I get too nerdy, just tell me to stop talking about this. The little different sections of their body all have a purpose. On the head, you'll see they have the two large compound eyes, and then they have three little bitty eyes right in between those. They see on the ultraviolet spectrum, they see colors that we do not, and all of the flowers, the native flowers that they're attracted to, have a pattern within the color petals that we can't see, that only the bees can see, and that's what draws them into that food. When I was in the beekeeping class, something I found very interesting was that those striking red flowers that we like so much, they can't see those, they see black. So it doesn't attract them at all. It doesn't help them. So if you have a red flower garden, it's not helping them at all. They're not going to pollinate them. The mandibles are how they eat and how they get water. The forelegs actually have combs on them so that they can clean pollen off of their tendons and clean their mouth. The hairs all over their legs are where all of the pollen will be collected, and the worker bees actually have little pouches on their thighs where they pack their pollen. They like their saplings. The stinger, of course, I mentioned to you, is connected to their venom sac, and when they do sting, and it is barbed, the worker bees can only sting once and then they die because it is barbed and it pulls out part of their abdomen. The queen has a smooth stinger. She can sting as many times as she cares to. Let's go to the next one. The compound eyes. Used for seeing shapes, and then the little bitty hard ones up at the top, and I've got some really pretty pictures coming up soon. Those are for seeing light. The proboscis, I have a hard time pronouncing that. I always want to call it propolis. Of course, for drinking water, nectar, and honey, and for creating that propolis, which is a very sticky compound that they seal up the cracks in their hives with, and also trap predators with. They do bite each other. They bite the mites off of each other, so their mandibles do that as well. You'll see on the left, the top row is pictures of flowers that the way we see them, and then the second row, how they see them with the light, and then the third row is the shapes. So they're seeing all of this at the same time. Fascinates me that they have all of these eyes and a little bitty brain in there and a little bitty heart that's beating constantly. So if you have 80,000 bees in a hive, there are 80,000 little hearts beating. That's it. You can go to the next one. Just another simpler picture. The pollen press, they can pack that down, and I have a picture coming up where you'll see it loaded down with pollen. Go to the next one. Different types of bees. The queen is in the middle. She has the longer abdomen. When a queen bee is a virgin, and you can buy virgin queen bees before she's gone out and mated, that is much smaller and she can actually fly. Once they have mated and all of those eggs inside of her are getting fertilized, they get back to the hive really quick because then they can't fly. Those wings cannot support the weight of that body. And I have seen a virgin queen in my hive and then gone back 2 weeks later, and she's huge. You can so easily tell her apart from the others. On the other hand, though, when I go and catch swarms, which I'll do if people have swarms, they'll call me and I'll go out and get them. It's very hard for me to see the queen because she looks small, so much smaller and very similar to the other bees. The one at the top with the giant black things on its head, that's a drone. That's the male. The males serve one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to mate with queens. So usually around the end of March, the beginning of April, actually this year it was a lot earlier, the queens will lay eggs and the worker bees will make drones out of them. And they will do that by feeding them certain things. And those cells look a lot different inside the hive. And they're a sticky, gooey mess when you're trying to open up a hive and work it. But those guys come out and, like I said, they dry off. They don't work at all. They just eat. And then when their wings have turned purple and their eyes are shining purple, you know they're ready to go. And they go out to a drone yard. And I haven't found one yet, and we're all looking. But drone yards are where hundreds and thousands of drone bees will hang out. They're always in an inverted triangle over a field where there's perfect conditions. And I know it's not just visual conditions that we can understand, but maybe other things that we just aren't aware of. And they hang out there, and the queens know where they are, and they fly there to get mated. And then they get back real fast before everything gets right and they start laying eggs. The little girl down here, that's the worker. They're the tiniest ones, and you'll see her back legs are really big and fat. That's pollen attached to the back of her legs. Next one. So this is a queen. And if you move this, you can see. They do have weird curly hairs, like spiky hair on the top of their head. They don't have the pollen basket on their legs. They have a really long tibia. They're very nimble, a lot quicker than the other bees. When I'm trying to chase one down in my hive, it's sometimes it can be very hard to catch them. But you'll notice all the hair. Look at the hair of her. Yeah, this is the back of her. That's her thorax, and this is the thorax here, and it's all furry. And this looks like a virgin queen because the abdomen isn't really long yet in comparison to the rest of the body. But all of this fur is where pollen is kept on them. Go to the next one. Here's a side view of her. And next. This is a little worker bee. Much smaller body, much hairier legs, much hairier thorax. She needs it. She has hair on her tail. They're just covered with hair. It reminds me of the little hair that's on newborn babies. It's just very fine, and they're actually very soft. The next, the drone. You'll see his eyes are touching at the top of his head. The other two, the queen and the worker bee, they don't. This is because he needs to be able to see the queens. The queens will only mate with the best, and they're always fighting out in that yard to get to the top of that triangle where the queens will go first. In October, when it starts getting cold. This year it was a little delayed because it was so warm last Saturday. But I think they kicked them out before that because I saw them. Usually when it starts getting cold, the girls lock the boys out. They kick them out of the hive because they do come back after they've mated, and then they just hang out and play cards and eat. The girls will kick them out, and the guards will make sure they stay out. I have seen them literally dragging drones out of the hive and taking them to the girls. Here, the next one. This is the side view of the drone. They're really fat and easy to tell they're in there. You can go to the next one. So here's a little worker bee. She's picking up nectar out of a daisy-like flower. You'll see on the list that I'm going to hand out to you, daisy-like flowers are a huge thing. So all of the black-eyed Susans, Shasta daisies, cone flowers, gosh, they love cone flowers. Asters, they love. And that's what I was referring to when you go to Lowe's and you look at the flowers that look kind of pink. It's not the mums, it's the asters they like. They don't get anything out of the mums. But they love those asters, and those are the ones that look kind of sickly when you're at the garden store, but those are the ones they like. The roadside blue ones, you'll always see honeybees on those. Go to the next one. A really good side-by-side view of a mature queen that has been mated. These look like Italian queens, or Italian bees, because they're yellow. And she's very bright yellow. The Italians usually are that nice bright hue. Just hanging out and working. You have worker bees in the back. These are her attendants. You can usually find the queen one of a few ways. Sometimes it's really hard when you have a big hive, but you can always tell because you see a little group of girls looking at one bee, and you know that's the queen. So she always has a circle of attendants hanging around her. You can go to the next one. This is the pollen picture I was trying to get to. This I find terribly nerdy, fascinating. All the different colors are just amazing. And this is because they're collecting pollen from so many different species of plants. Mine love the poplar trees. The honey that I get out of mine, because my property is covered in poplar trees, and they seem to bloom really early, one of the first things in the spring. The very first time I tasted honey from one of my bees, I think it was 2017, that spring. It tasted like oranges. It was so wild, and it was a very light color. I have a friend that has black hawthorn trees on his property that also produce pollen very early. His honey is dark, 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 almost brown. So that would, all of these different colors of the pollen will create completely different honey colors. When you go to the store, you don't notice different colors, really, do you? From the processed honey, it's all pretty generic and the same. Yeah. I don't really know what they're doing there. It shouldn't all look the same. You can get different color honey at different times of the year out of a hive. You can go to the next one. You could see her saddlebags are full of pollen here. She's one of Forsythia. I have many, 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 and I'll tell you all now, if you want any Forsythia bushes, I have tons of baby Forsythia bushes that I will not throw away. I have just been moving them throughout granite. I'm planting them in the field next to me now because I just hate to have anything die for no reason. And what's wrong with having wildflowers? So, and it's a food source. Nobody seems to care. BG&E loves it because it cuts down on their work. Next. Okay. One of the things we really wanted to talk about, probably the reasons people keep bees, is honey. But the reason I stuck this in here is it's a beautiful picture of how a bee formats their nursery. You'll see a half moon shape in the center of this frame of honey, and around in that half moon is where the eggs are laid. around the outside of that half moon, there's pollen and there's honey. They always do it this way. I've had the odd queen that was kind of just learning the ropes, and she would get a little messed up every once in a while, but they always seem to eventually get inherently back into this pattern. This goop on the edge of the wooden frame, that is propolis. It's very, very sticky. If they get hive beetles or mites in their hives, they will propolis those things into a little propolis jail in a corner of the hive and not let it out, so that they don't contaminate the honey. You see worker bees here taking care of the babies. They're feeding the babies. So all of this food around the perimeter of the half moon feeds that set of babies. So they don't have to touch the stuff that they're putting away in another part of the hive for winter. They have different sections for different areas. It's like us canning food for the winter. Up above the nursery, that's where they're storing all their food. And down on the lower level is where they'll put their pollen. So the honey goes up at the top, pollen goes down below. Oh, go back to the other one. Interesting. I don't know if you read that, but it takes, what's the number? To make 1 teaspoon of honey, it takes 2 million flowers. Yeah, the distance between Washington, D.C. and Boston to make 1 pound.
I want to read that out.
Yeah. Bees must tap 2 million flowers and travel the equivalent of the distance between Washington, D.C. and Boston to make just 1 pound of honey. So 1 pound is that bear jar at the grocery store. That's 1 bee doing all of that work. No wonder they die so early. So have respect when you go buy that 1 pound of honey, right? Go to the next one. This is typical of what I normally see as a bee enabler. I don't call myself a beekeeper because I don't raise mine to stay at my yard. I don't try to keep them. But I make it easy for them to hang out there, that's for sure. I don't usually take their honey. I have in the past, but I do it for different reasons. But if I open up the hive, this is what I'll see. And this looks to be about 15,000 bees just in that 1 box alone. Very heavy. When you pick up a super, I brought some examples of a hive. This hive is, hold on, over here. This box that I'm bringing over is a nucleus. This is a small box. It's only 9 inches wide. You can have an 8 frame, which is 14 inches wide, and then a 10 frame, which is 16 inches wide. All of them are the same 21 inches deep, full of frames where the bees can put in honeycomb and then fill it with food and babies. I use nucleuses, and actually I tore this apart so that you guys could see the workings of it when I'm catching a swarm. But normally I have all of them stapled, the bottom stapled to this and taped, and then I just scoop the swarm into the box, and then they go live, and I bring them home and make sure they're okay for the winter. And then they, in the spring, they swarm and make more bees. So that's why I do it, is to just make more bees. I get a big kick out of this one. But this box can weigh 30 pounds if I left it there and they filled it with babies and honey. That box that you're looking at there, that would weigh approximately 60 pounds if it were full of bees and honey, which is why I didn't raise a lot of bees this year, because I couldn't pick up 60 pounds. I have to pick it up 1 frame at a time and put it in a box. I have friends in the Howard County Beekeepers Association that are so on it, like they are bam on this stuff. That they go in, they take them out, they put it in empty, they go in, they take it out, they put it in empty. They've harvested over 400 pounds a summer. They're busy people. I got a full-time job. I don't have time for that. So just let them hang out. You can go to the next one. Okay. How they make honey. The forager bees gather nectar from flowers and return to the hive. The nectar is actually passed from their mouths to the mouths of the worker bees, who then travel through the hive and put it where they're going to store it. The worker bee that is collecting the nectar, they don't go in. They don't get to take a break. They don't go to the bathroom. They're not allowed. They just pass it on, and then they have to go back out. The bees that it's the baby bees, the ones that are under 21 days old, that it's their job to fan, they go in there and they fan the honey with their wings to dehydrate it. Once it is exactly 95 degrees and the nectar's moisture level reaches 17%, which somehow they know, then they cap it. And then that's when you find things like this. You pull it out, you see that. This is not a prize winning frame of honey. But I'll show it to them. This is honey. Here. There. Frame of honey. Woo-hoo. See? This was stored up at the top of the hive. This was obviously not for baby making. This wasn't one of their nursery frames. But you can pass this around if you'd like. It's a little sticky. I mean, very sticky. You have to get used to that. I brought a few different phases. So you can see what it looks like when the bees are. When I first started beekeeping, they said you need to get frames, which the wooden part is a frame, and you have to get foundation, or you don't have to. You can use a wax foundation, or you can use something with nothing in between, and the bees will create their own honeycomb. And I've had plenty of bees do that. They just have a tendency to get a little rogue, and you can't collect any honey or really do a good inspection inside the hive if they're making their own and they want to build all over the place in here. So if you're really wanting to go after the honey, it's best to use frames and some sort of foundation. Doesn't it smell wonderful? I like to use black for my brood, where I'm going to put the foundations for the bees to put babies, because the eggs are white. And when you're in a bee suit and you've got a veil on and your reading glasses and you're sweating, and you can't see even with your reading glasses on, it's a lot easier to see eggs on black. So that's nice. Yeah, I can pass that around if you like. Here's a frame with natural wax in it, and the bees had started to build out honeycomb. This was one of my less successful hives. This was up at the top and they never did fill it out. So in the end of the summer, I usually take out all the spares that they haven't filled up, because this stuff starts to melt a little bit with the heat and it gets warped and it's not so happy. But it smells wonderful. And if you look, they create all of these cells and they're absolutely identical to each other. If I have noticed too that they have a tendency to, especially for the large ones where they're storing their honey, they tilt up at the edges, and so it doesn't run out. They're not horizontal, they're tipped just slightly. Really good example of this is just honeycomb that they built, and this was for brood rearing. You'll see it's really dark through here. Honeycomb, when they make it, is white, like Bob has in his hands. It's like a slightly off white. It gets dark because of the little dirty feet running all over it all day. And so it can get very, very dark. See, it's a little lighter on this side. But this is where they had babies store eggs laid and children were born, and they used them over and over again. It's got cobwebs on it. Sorry. After the baby has arrived or the bee has come out of the cell, nurse bees will go in and clean it out, make it nice and shiny again, and then the queen will come through and lay another egg. Excuse the, you'll see some rogue stuff down at the bottom. This is a display base for the state fair or the Howard County Fair. It's a couple of years ago. They have a lot of entries. This is called a deep. Those I generally, when I started doing this, because I do have arthritis, I was using a lot of those more shallow frames because I had boxes like the one you saw that were 10 across. So I went back to a slightly narrower box. So I only have 8 frames and I went to deeps. And this seems to be what they prefer to make as a nursery. And they don't seem to mind those shallow ones at all for the honey. But here's one again showing the nursery area and then the food around the edges. This was robbed like crazy. This was in a hive I left with frames in it during the spring, and all the bees from all around and the other neighbors that keep bees came over and robbed all the honey out of it. So you'll notice they're tattered and torn edges to the comb. They just made their way in, took all the honey and took off. So I had a lot of that last year. On this side, it's completely black, and that is honeycomb. For those of you who are not here, this is filthy dirty, and normally we don't want to use this in beekeeping. A lot of beekeepers will pull this out of their hives because with the dirt also comes any pesticides they've come in contact with. So it can build up to a toxic level and possibly make them get sick. And then if they get invaders like mites or hive beetles, then they would succumb to them. So normally people pull this out after it gets to this level. But when I'm laying swarm traps, which is how I get my bees now in the spring, I make swarm traps and then they just come on over and move in. And I don't have to pay for them, and I don't have to get them from Georgia anymore. They eat this stuff up. They love it. It draws them in like honey. So you can pass that around. Or just repeats. I had a shallow and a deep box, so they decided they were going to make their own honeycomb. Yeah. You see up here where they created, they were continuing the frame, continuing the frame down below. And when I pulled this out, there were many others attached to this, and they were all connected to each other, and a lot of them crumbled. Makes it really hard to check for pests in there, beetles, or to get your honey out or do any kind of bee management to keep them healthy. So I learned my lesson. I stopped using shallows, but sometimes in a pinch, you just put whatever's in there. My first 2 years, you were saying your wife hasn't had much luck the first couple of years. I made so many colossal, horrible mistakes. And I still do occasionally because your mind wanders and you just get on autopilot and you just do whatever. I kept forgetting to put the inner cover on in my hive, and they were building honeycomb from the top cover that was keeping birds from going in there. And I would open it up and it was just filled with honeycomb, and it was a big mess, and a waste of their energy. So I try not to do that. If you hold up the one with the, you still pass it around the one with the, pass this around and look at it through the light, you can see the different colors. It's amazing. If you'd like to, or you can just come up and look at it. Just staying on honeybees for one more few minutes, just a few more minutes, and then we'll get back to just bees in general. For keeping bees, I do believe it was a startup cost. Langstrom hives are used very widely around here. That's what I see when I'm driving down the road. There's a place on Dogwood Road that has them now too. I've seen. I think it's on the left-hand side if you're going east. I've seen some hives on the left in a house. I think it's past the little tiny blue house with the rooster, which I think is adorable. Langstrom hives, these would be the type, the man's name was Langstrom, and he had observed bees for so long, he realized in their hives that they built naturally, they had a little bee space wide enough for them to traverse, and he measured it when he noticed that it was identical all the time. So he created a box about the measurement that they seem to prefer, and these frames are built such that the frames will hang with exactly that amount of space between them, so that the bees will continue to use it. They'll build out the foundation, and then that to them is perfect. It's a lot of math involved. When I created my first swarm trap, it was 2 measurements that were specified by one of our master beekeepers. He said, this seems to work. This is the size you want. These are the measurements you want. Really? How can they tell? It's the only swarm trap that ever worked for me. I've tried many different types, but that one, they're in there every year. And I usually put them away. So, it's a new beekeeper. So the different sections are the base. This is the base. I usually use screened ones to try to keep other bugs out, to keep from annoying them. After the base comes a super. They call these supers. It took me a long time to remember to call these supers. I just call them boxes. I like the deep ones for the brood, and this is if I was putting a new colony in here. And then over top of this, you have a cover, and my covers all have little holes in them with screen, and that's where I will put food and feed them if a nectar flow hasn't started yet. And that goes on top. Some safe, and then above that, a lid. And mine are, most of them usually are covered with some sort of sheet metal, be it copper or stainless steel, and they fit together like this. As they fill these up, you add another layer, and then you add another layer, and then you add another layer, unless you split the colony. I don't. I let them swarm. The girls that in the neighborhood that I'm on a thread with for texting are familiar with me sending texts out saying, the bees are swarming, the bees are swarming. And I have had people come over to watch because I think it's beautiful. It's just amazing to see them go up. Like I said, I started this for allergies. And they have gone down, except I've started to become pretty sensitive to bee stings. Over the years, people normally go the other way and get less sensitive to them have gotten more. I don't know if it's the type of bees or what. I pulled honey a few times, give it out. I've sold some, but I really prefer not to, especially if I'm trying to help a small colony one, and I haven't for 2 years. The most recent, the colony that's in the backyard right now is one that was a swarm. Somebody called me from Tractor Supply. They said, there's a colony of bees on my worker's car and he needs to go home. Can you come get them? I said, sure. So, and you know where Tractor Supply is, over on Liberty. So I went over with that box and my little suit and a smoker. And I saw the car. It was easy to spot. I put the box down under right next to the car. And I smoked them a little bit, looked for the queen, figured I saw her. She was tiny, and it was very small group of girls, very small. It was late, and it was in September, which meant they would have for sure died if they hadn't had a perfect place to go to that would keep them warm. They didn't have any food stores. There was no way for them to get food because no flowers were blooming at the time. So I had quite the interesting audience. You can imagine some of the things that people said while I was just pushing them into the box. They didn't care. They were relaxed. I sprayed them with sugar water. They were like, ooh. So they just went right in the box. And once I got the queen in, the others literally just walked into the box. It's like magic. But people were freaking out. Watching me in the parking lot. But I took them home, and I know that ball of bees wasn't bigger than this. It couldn't have been more than 2,000 bees. I put them in, kept them in that box. I wrapped them in styrofoam because I knew there wasn't enough bees to keep the queen warm. And I kept it up near my house away from the wind. And I put some what is it called, fondant on top of it for the winter. And I had stored some frames of honey in the freezer, which I do every year in case bees need food during the winter. So I thawed that out and I put that in, and they survived. Knock wood, they're still out there. I just wrapped them today because it got so cold so fast. I don't like to wrap them. I'd rather see them being more naturalized, but I did 3 walls because I get that wind coming off that field that it's just brutal. If I can feel it, I know they.
Are you close to finishing? Because it has been about
Yes.
an hour.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. The hive is about 4 feet tall now, so I have to get on a step stool to get to them, and they swarm twice this year. So it's been I didn't take honey, but a lot more bees. To help them keep going along and to keep multiplying like this, I have a handout for all of you for the types of flowers you can plant that are very native. And I know a lot of you that are gardeners in the area are already very tuned in to native plants. But I just thought I would help with that. Another thing you can do on these very, very hot, dry days is put out a dish of water and put stones in the bottom or glass beads or whatever, so they have something to land on. Otherwise they'll drown in the water, so that they can get something to drink. It takes a lot of water for them to stay alive. And watch when you use pesticides. If you absolutely have to use them at night when they're in their hives, so they don't get any cast off spray. But naturalizing your yards, if you ever drive past my yard, boy, am I naturalized. I'm glad I don't have picky neighbors. Naturalizing, letting wildflowers grow, not using pesticides, putting a little water out, are all very helpful. And if you're interested in becoming a beekeeper, I highly recommend the Howard County Beekeeping group. And the website is on this handout. I'm going to give you, if you'll click forward, you'll see a lot more. This is the things that are against them, the pesticides being one of them, not having a habitat that they could use with naturalized plants. Go to the next. These are some of their little pests that really do a lot of destruction to them. This is a varroa mite, and you can see one on the head of a pen. They're that small. Go to the next one. Scary looking buggers, aren't they? They get on the bees. They're like the fleas of the bees. Next one is hive beetles. They will destroy your honey. I have had some bad battles with hive beetles. Next. Ways to attract and help. I have a link at the bottom of this. So since you are recording this, maybe people can look and go to some of these sites that are on this page, and I do believe the next one. I have several sites here that I thought you might find interesting. So hopefully, it's hard to tell where to go and where to end with this because I get a little nerdy and you can tell me, but I'm done. But these were all websites that you could get lost in that are specific to Maryland and to the history of the bees.
All right, thank you, Merlowe.
And if it had been spring, it would have been better.
Anybody have any questions for her?
Have a little input, not exactly, when I was in, Maryland,
Mhm.
and, they had, the department had hives all over Maryland research farms.
Yes.
PG and Charles County.
Yep.
And they're able to sort of segregate the bees among certain specific plants.
Yes.
So we
Can-
had,
can you-
there must have been 40 different kinds of honey.
Can you hear John?
No, can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question, please? So we can hear it?
There is no question. There's a comment.
Oh, okay. Well, tells you we couldn't
Can you
hear
me?
it.
Can you hear him?
Yes.
Should I move in?
I'm gonna stand over here, it's probably better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that when I was at Maryland, I took a beekeeping course many years ago. And they had hives around the Maryland research farms down in PG and Charles County. And they were able to segregate bees to certain specific plants. So they'd have like 40 different kinds of honey in the beekeeping department. And they go from, some are almost clear. I think it is it wheat? It's almost clear.
Oh, yeah.
And then buckwheat looks like molasses.
Mm-hmm.
It is so thick and so black. But what Merlowe said about the tulip poplar honey, that was every single person's favorite honey.
Yeah.
It was tulip poplar. Right? And Sue can verify that because I used to bring it home.
One of the links at the end is for the it's that foundation.
Yeah.
It's the Maryland and the Department of Agriculture too have linked together. A lot of the pictures I have on here are from the Talbot County and Charles County, all of those. Because they have photographers on that website. It's just amazing. Just amazing.
Anybody else? Alrighty, thank you again. We'll stop recording. Appreciate the talk, Merlowe. Very interesting. And